When the spelling of the surname Wallace ends with IS, it often refers to a person from Wales. An early example of its use as a surname in Yorkshire occurred in the year 1340, when a tenant called Wallace, probably from Burg Wallace, appeared before an inquisition held at the manor of Almondbury. Robert Wallace, one of my great-great-great-grandfathers, used the Scottish form of the name. Originally, that spelling referred to a Briton from the ancient kingdom of Strathclyde, with its main stronghold at Dumbarton Rock. By far the most prominent Scot of the Wallace family was William Wallace, a 13th century Scottish hero who inflicted several defeats on the English army. Perhaps his most notable success was at Stirling Bridge, which is now overlooked by a monument dedicated to his bravery. The ancestry of Robert Wallace is something of a mystery. So far it has not been possible to discover who his parents were or where he was born. When he married Elizabeth Fletcher at Clareborough in Nottinghamshire in 1794, his residence was given as Clareborough. However, no record of his birth or the birth of his wife has been found in the parish register. After the marriage, he became a farmer at Clayworth, where Anne, his first child, was baptised. 3 other children, John, Thomas and Elizabeth, were also baptised at Clayworth. No trace of Robert has been found after 1804, but his wife, Elizabeth, appears to have moved to Normanton-Trent and died there in 1820, a widow aged 56. She may have gone to Normanton to be near her son, Thomas, who farmed in the village. The connections between the descendants of Robert Wallace and Elizabeth Fletcher and the Farrer family are significant. There were 4 marriages, and Charles Wallace were the Christian names given to my father. The first connection was made at Womersley in 1817, when, at the age of 22, Anne Wallace married 37-year-old John Farrer of Kellington. Having left Nottinghamshire, she was possibly employed as a house servant at nearby Smeaton Parva, now called Little Smeaton. John Farrer was already established as a farmer and living at Oglethorpe Hall in Kellington. Within a few years, most of his brothers and sisters emigrated to America, leaving him in sole charge of the farm. Between 1818 and 1835, John and Anne gave birth to 12 children. Their large family prompted Samuel Hurst, a local resident, to write, "A pretty family, I call it." When Anne's husband died, she was 44 years old and left to bring up the large young family and run the farm. In the 1841 census, Anne was described as a farmer and most of her children were living on the farm. 2 agricultural labourers were also living there. Her daughter Jane had died 5 years earlier, and her son Samuel had become an apprentice draper to William Newby at Snaith. 10 years later, Anne was described as a farmer of 140 acres. Only 4 children remained at home, but 2 of Anne's nephews, John and Robert Wallace, sons of her brother Thomas at Normanton-on-Trent, were also on the farm. In 1855, Anne's eldest son, John, travelled to Normanton-on-Trent to marry his cousin, Caroline Wilkinson. This connection with the Wallace family came through Caroline's mother, Elizabeth Wallace, Anne's sister, who had married William Wilkinson, a farmer of Skegby. 2 years later, Anne died of apoplexy and was buried near her husband at Kennington. Their eldest daughter, Elizabeth, and son Henry are also remembered on the memorial stone. John and Caroline took on the Kellington farm, then owned by Lord Harewood, but in 1860 the farm was sold and later demolished. John and Caroline took on another farm on the Lord Harewood estate, Rudding Farm at Brackenthwaite near Harrogate. In November the following year, the third connection with the Wallace family was made at Pontefract Church when Anne's daughter, also called Anne, married Charles Wallace. Charles was a son of Thomas Wallace, the farmer at Normanton-on-Trent. After the marriage, Charles and Anne moved to a farm, now called Grange Farm, at Torksey in Lincolnshire. Both lived to a good age and were buried in the churchyard at Torksey. Charles died aged 77 in 1912 and Anne died 3 months later, aged 86. They had no children. John and Caroline had 2 children, Henry and John, but in 1863 Caroline caught a fever and died. She was buried at Kirkby Overblow. The following year, John returned to Nottinghamshire to make the 4th Wallace connection and marry another cousin, Caroline's sister, Ellen. 25 years later, my father, a grandson of John and Caroline, was baptised at Methley and named Charles Wallace, which must have been in recognition of the strong connections with the Wallace family. Neither Christian names had been used previously by the family.